I'm very nervous today because when I came to Pune first time, I joined a company which had been founded by Mr. Ajay Patel, that is Vipassana Software. So I just talking about him. Uh, of course, he has more than 30 or 40 years of experience here there in the industry. But currently, he's mainly working for consulting on sustainability, carbon accounting, and business transformation. Plus, he's the advisor for the many startups in healthcare and environment spaces. So he's a board member of Translators. So company are in the specialized in sensor to cloud platforms in health space. So as you know, he has an extensive entrepreneurial and executive experience in the area of the products and services, in the be it in the software or for the instruments and services in the area of connectivity and many things. So basically currently he's interested in ecological economics, interplay between the energy and economics and sustainability. So, apart from this, we also interested in impact of businesses and current economic and energy policies on the environment and sustainability. He has written several articles and essays on interdisciplinary topics of energy, economics, development, education, health, and the need of transformation of businesses to be more sustainable. So, he is also a board of trustees on the Ecology Circle Society of Pune and in working of in the area of ecology, ecological education, and environment. He also teaches environmental history, energy and system and sustainability at the Ecological Society and also in the symposiums. So basically, he did BTech in Chemical Engineering from IIT Bombay and he did Masters in Computer Science and postgraduate diploma in Sustainable Management of Natural Resources and Natural Conservation from the Ecological Society. So he also received the Distinguished Service Award from IIT Bombay. And of course, he is an amateur and ultra satellite and passionate about the outdoor, apart from innovation and cross-disciplinary problem solving. So such a wide experience and such a wide uh, uh, intellect we are having today in the form of Mr. Ajay Patel. I request Mr. Ajay Patel to kindly start his lecture on sustainability. I'm just stopping my presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Vinod, and thank you all who have joined this morning. Welcome to this short seminar on sustainability. I am hopeful that this will help you get a sense of what sustainability is all about and also a little bit about what we can do as individuals as well as businesses. So let me put up my presentation so that I am a little bit more structured. Just let me know once you see this.
Yes, sir.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, visible.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so let me actually go back a bit. We'll start with. So this particular session, what we do is we intend to cover or rather try and answer part of these three questions. If anybody is not on mute, it would be nice if you could go on mute. All right. So, these are the three questions that we will ponder in today's session. One, why is sustainability so important to understand? We also need to, in this particular question or sub question, why it has become suddenly so very important in the last couple of years, 5 years. What is the exact status of sustainability as a situation today? And of course, equally important or probably most important for all of us is to, what are the possible responses which are available to us. And as I said, as individuals, as communities, as businesses, as governments, what are the responses that we do have available in the current state of affairs? So this is a slightly modified definition of what sustainability is all about, and I will spend a minute on this anyhow. So essentially, sustainability means that one thing that all of us must understand, and many times we remain unaware of this, is anything that we do has a very strong connection with nature. Any resource that we talk about that we use in our industry to make anything at all comes from nature, and that connection has to be very well understood to really understand that so to the really understand the meaning of this word sustainability. Saying is we have to avoid depletion of natural resources, which will allow maintaining ecological balance, and even more so or equally so well-being of all life forms including humans, now, that is today, as well as into the future. Now, there are many things which are covered, in these three lines. So, number one is basically a message that we must look at how we can use natural resources prudently. There are two categories of resources that we talk about. One category is abiotic, which is all our minerals and much of the industrial input that we use, except for a few which require biotic input. So this is called abiotic set of resources, and then the biotic resources, which come from nature, either in terms of wood-like input. It could be biomass in various ways. It could be living beings. It could be food. So all these are essentially biotic resources. So how can we avoid depletion? So there are two ways of avoiding depletion of resources, and I'll come to that a little bit later in this session. So in the process of making sure that we use these resources prudently, we also ensure in the process that the ecological balance is maintained. Now, what is ecological balance? In schools we had studied something called the food chain and a food web, as also the pyramid of life, so to say. So, for example, you are going to have plant which are called autotrophs, or those who can make their food themselves. So plants are eaten by small animals. Small animals are consumed by bigger animals. Those are further consumed by apex predators. So you create a pyramid, and any link that you kind of get out of sync in this whole pyramid, or when the link is lost, there is a great chance that the pyramid can collapse. So this is very important, and ecological balance is all about ensuring that this web of life is intact. And that's why I said that ensures well-being for all life forms, whether they're plants, whether they're animals, whether they're human beings, in whether they live in water, whether they live on land, or what have you. And the last part is it's not just the current state, but it's also into the future, so that we can actually sustain as species for a long period of time. Uh, so what really sustains life on Earth? And this is one question that many of us don't even ask, and I feel that we should very quickly run through the fundamentals, right? One of the key reasons why we continue to have such a good life for last 10, 12,000 years is amenable climate, which means that the hazards which can happen within our space, I call them spatial hazards, are very low. Our distance from the sun is right, our distance from the moon is right, and we have the ozone layer, fortunately, which kind of protects us. So this is about the amenable climate. Another very, very important part is, of course, availability of water. That, of course, goes to saying that you are talking about the right temperature. We actually get liquid water many times a year, or whole 12 months of the year, all over the places where we stay. Fresh water and reasonably good distribution in terms of different people staying at different places. Right composition of the atmosphere, so adequate flora available, which is responsible for maintaining the right levels of oxygen, If it goes more than that, it is poisonous. If it goes below the current levels, it's problem as well. As you know that if you climb mountains, you start becoming uncomfortable, and that's because your oxygen levels keep reducing. And of course, the nutrients recycling and various natural cycles, including hydrological cycles, how the water moves through the system, right? Biological cycles of various kinds. We are born, we die, and whatever, whenever we die, the it all of the material is kind of recycled by nature, for example. Or whenever we eat food and create waste, the waste is expected to be recycled by nature as long as the scale is right. Food chains and food webs and so on and so forth. So I think these are different core reasons why we have been able to sustain life for a reasonable period of time on Earth. Now we quickly go to something called planetary boundaries, because many times we keep harping on only one parameter, which is CO2 emissions. While it can be considered a proxy to many, there are quite a few other things which are also very important when we talk about sustainability. So if you really look at it, what this is an ideal diagram, I would say. Why ideal diagram? Because we have to ensure that the biosphere or our nature is the largest part of nature. And then we are talking largest part of our system. Then we are talking about the society and then the economy. So that's the ideal part. But what is the current situation? The current situation is something like this, right? We see that the economy is become bigger than the society and nature. Now, what does that really mean? It essentially means that if we have an annual budget, let's say of 100 rupees, uh, we are actually consuming today close to 160, 170 rupees a year. Now, where does this 60 or 70 rupees come from? So it is actually coming from it is coming from borrowing. So economy is actually borrowing from nature year on year, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we want to make a transition. This is where we are today. It has so happened that without really our uh, active knowledge, we landed up where we have. Maybe we started talking about it way back in 1972 when the first report called Limits to Growth was published by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and several industry leaders and several thought leaders across the world. For those who are interested, I will share that with one of you, maybe Mr. Bapat or Vinod, and they can share it with you. It's a very interesting reading. Those who become interested can go through that. So we need to make this transition. This transition has to happen from where we are, that is economy bigger than society and nature, to nature which has to become bigger than economy and society. So there are several options that are available to us. One option is actually shrinking the economy. Now this is something which is generally not acceptable. Number one, maybe that certain economies today can indeed shrink and still maintain the well-being, but many other economies, including that of India, need to grow, need to ensure that it provides enough for many people. Around 60% of India needs to probably consume more than consume less. But there are still 10, 20, 30% of India which can actually consume less as well. So within India, we have again two pockets for that matter, right? So the point is that we need to make a transition from where we are today to where we want to be, which is nature becoming the biggest bubble. And the reason for that is that's the provider of all the inputs to society and economy. If we don't do that, we will exhaust nature in some time, and then we will not have anything to bank upon at all as human species, as well as for all life forms. So we need minimal imprint on resource and energy use as a message. So these are 9 parameters which have been talked about. This is one of the seminal research by an institution in Sweden called Stockholm Research Institute. And Professor Rockstrom actually wrote this seminal paper in 2009. and there have been several revisions of this paper over a period of time as well. But what essentially we are talking about is there are these 9 important wedges that we need to keep looking at. And one of the wedge is climate change. So we need to understand other wedges as well. So biosphere integrity is a very important wedge, which talks about genetic diversity. So as you probably know, that as we lose species, we are actually losing genetic diversity. Uh, and uh, uh, and that genetic diversity loss also has an indirect impact on what we call as functional diversity, in terms of saying, what does the diversity really do in terms of maintaining ecological balance. Land system change. I think this is one of the biggest thing that has happened over a period of time, and large part of this has happened because we have started using more and more energy. When we did not have access to fossil energy, we were we wouldn't have been able to destroy the kind of destruction in terms of changing land system that we have done over a period of a mere 200 years. So in fact, it is said that the advent of diesel chainsaw was a indicator of things to come, which allowed us to cut maybe hundreds of trees within a day, unlike when I wanted to cut those manually. I might have landed up cutting just one or two, right? So the scale at which we were able to change the land system became very high as our access to fossil energy became much bigger. Then we are talking about freshwater use, which is also very critical. Even while in this diagram you don't see that criticality, the criticality varies by region. And as far as India is concerned, water is probably one of the most critical resources that we need to conserve and manage in the best possible manner. Biogeochemical flows. This is actually very relevant to the type of work that many of us do. Many of us work in process industries like fertilizers, for example, or supply to these industries. Fertilizers, of course, remain important part of our economic system, and even system which allows around 8 billion people to live on Earth. But the excess use of fertilizers causes enormous side effects. It causes acidification of oceans. It causes salinization of soil. It causes acidity in soil. It causes depletion of soil fertility and whatnot. So prudent use of fertilizers is still required till the time we are able to make a transition to natural system of growing our food. But we have to be sure and we have to understand that this has caused enormous disturbances in the biogeochemical flows in our natural system, both terrestrial and aquatic. Ocean acidification I talked about a little bit. Atmospheric aerosol loading, that also has enormous issues. One on pollution, and second also on heat retention or otherwise. Ozone depletion, many of us know about that. There is still a hole in the ozone layer somewhere around on top of South Pole, and it is causing extra radiation to come in. And there are issues related to cancers also happening in those regions in the world, skin cancers which happen because of that excess radiation that comes in. And of course, novel entities, we create substances which we do not know what will happen because of those substances at the end of life. And that also is a challenging situation, if you will. Right. So I think these are some of the things that we need to start becoming cognizant of. It talks about what are therefore, how have we impacted this boundary. I talked about most of these, global warming and climate change is predominantly related to burning fossil fuels, and also some of the other GHGs, what we call about greenhouse gases, other industrial gases like NOx, SOx, and so on, as well as emitting methane through various means. Cattle emit methane, our industries emit methane. Many times methane is not flared. Flaring itself is a big issue, and so on and so forth. Change in biodiversity, biosphere integrity, predominantly because of land system change, habitat destruction and modification, We keep constructing and expanding our urban activities, constructions, buildings, new towns, new industries, and so on and so forth. Stratospheric ozone depletion, use of chemicals like chlorofluorocarbons. I think many of us are aware of that. Ocean acidification is because of industrial and marine pollution. Biogeochemical flows, especially phosphorus and nitrogen cycles, are disturbed. Phosphorus, as you know, comes from detergents. Most of our detergents use a lot of phosphorus, and that causes several issues with our aquatic bodies. It creates algal blooms. It creates challenges like water hyacinth and fistia. It kills the water in terms of DO, what is called dissolved oxygen levels, and therefore aquatic life cannot handle that, and so on and so forth. So these issues, I think, we have to be aware. I talked about a bit about the large system change, and biggest problem is, some of these also cause things which will never come to us. Like, one of the theories which is fairly supported is the pandemic, like Corona, happened because of the fact that we have encroached habitats which we shouldn't have. And then, the pathogens which were residing in those habitats happily kind of escaped that habitat and then, came into our human system. Right? Freshwater use, agriculture and industrial practices are responsible for excessive use of fresh water and so on and so forth. Aerosol loading like DEO, fragrances, or other volatile organic chemicals that we keep using day in and day out. Novel entities, this is something which is a wedge which we do not know. And we hope that there is no side effect, but we have seen over a period of time that side effects like microplastics or any nanomaterials getting into aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems has been causing a lot of havoc. So I'm going to wait for a minute. I think I probably used 10, 12, 15 minutes. If there are any questions, I'll take a minute or so and then move forward. Okay, so if there are no questions, I will continue. So if you really look at it, the economy is getting much bigger than the biosphere today. Our annual budgets are being consumed in 7 months, 8 months, 6 months today. And considering that all of our economy and its goods and services are dependent on nature, this kind of transgression is not going to sustain, or it cannot sustain for too long. And it means that we have to do something about how we are able to manage these resources in a best possible manner. So as I talked about actually on the first slide itself, all of our products that we use and consume come from nature. So for us to be able to sustain in this situation, we need what is called a rational exploitation. And I'll explain that a little bit. If you see food, you see water, you see energy, all the key elements of life where we are directly dependent on uh, come directly or indirectly from nature. So let me take a minute on what is rational exploitation. Take an example of I take an example of a paper mill, which is much easier for us, all of us here to understand. Let's assume that our paper mill uses bamboo as an input. Now this bamboo, we need to consume, month after month, year after year. And if we just keep cutting bamboo forests in and around us, we are going to finish those off. And therefore, what paper mills keep doing is they have bamboo plantations, which, for example, they will have bamboo plantations for, let's say, sufficient for, let's say, next 20 years, next 30 years. And every time they cut a particular section, which is, let's say, consumed over a period of 6 months or a year, they will plant new bamboo. So that this cycle, so by the time they finish their 20th piece, of bamboo plantation or cultivation, the first one that was planted 20 years ago is again ready to be used. And if we are able to manage the resources in this particular fashion, what we talk about is rational exploitation. So we are able to replenish these resources even while we are using them, and we are using them in a manner whereby we are not depleting them over a reasonable time span. So that's the whole idea about this concept of rational exploitation. Just look at food. Now, these are 2, 3 examples which will give you an idea about, what are we really talking about, right? And the extent of impact that we have on some small things as well. So I mean, we cannot even write the amount of water that is required for world food production, right? 23 into 10 raised to 12 liters. So that's a kind of water we consume annually, diesel we consume annually um, for irrigating our fields for food production in the world. So that's a very large number. If you look at a water footprint, a simple 400 grams of bread that we eat, a loaf of bread that we eat, consumes roughly 1200 to 1500 liters of water in the whole life cycle. So it's these are large numbers, as you can see, right? So consuming exactly only as much as we need actually can very quickly help save on natural resources, as you can see. And slowly but surely that can become, or that could be a step towards sustainability. You require fertile soil, adequate water and carbon dioxide and sunlight, and of course a whole lot of energy, as you can see here, right? Now, one of the things that has happened over a period of time is base soil fertility, what I call, is decreasing with continued and heavy use of fertilizers. So, which means that the microbes, which are also responsible for making soil fertile, the organic matter which gets into the soil, which actually is food for these microbes, also is an important part of the soil. As that gets depleted because of significant use of fertilizers, you are going to lose fertility, and then you will have to depend on chemical fertilizers and external inputs for producing anything at all. Soil salinity due to irrigation, that because of irrigation the whole thing becomes looser, and the salts from below the surface come on top, and that creates salinity in soil, which again is not very good for growing food. Topsoil erosion, we already know excess irrigation causes topsoil erosion, and which is, so for making soil, you need thousands of years. So reasonable, even an inch of soil, you need thousands of years to be able to get that inch of soil, which actually is scored material from our mountains as our rivers flow into the floodplains. And what you're essentially talking about here is, you're depleting this very quickly through this whole process of industrialized agriculture. As we know, less than 1% of water, fresh water, is available for humans to use. We have very limited availability. Just to give a sense of the amount of water we use for products which we may not even really consume, just one 330 milliliter can of Coke requires as much as 170 liters of water. So imagine that, right? Then forests are our active reservoirs. They are actually reservoirs of water, and we've already lost around 1/3 of our forests. So I think these are critical things, and we need to start thinking about it in terms of what we can do. India is extremely water stressed. We do not know as urban consumers, but Delhi and Bengaluru are under extreme water stress. And what is being talked about is the groundwater probably will run out anytime soon, right? So that's, in fact, this is a news item way back in 2018, and we are already facing the level of scarcity in both these cities, and we have to figure out different ways of bringing water to these cities. The groundwater is almost done, almost finished. I think you already know about this, but just take a look at the graph on the bottom right hand corner. Look at right in from 1900 roughly. Actually, after the industrial revolution, the energy use started increasing, and how has it has increased? It's growing almost exponentially, and this kind of a growth in energy use causes all the undesired side effects. You're talking about pollution, you're talking about resource depletion, you're talking about land system change, and so on and so forth. And that is also the reason why climate change or global warming or excess CO2 emission is looked at as a proxy to many of the challenges that we face. These are again temperature trends. See that the rate at which things have grown between 1970 and 2000, and this is slightly old data, or even between 2000 and 2020. I think it is alarming. The rate at which temperatures are increasing is absolutely alarming. So now that we generally know where we are, and the situation is not very hunky dory, we should start looking at what are the possible pathways. We should start looking at what therefore we can do. Again, I will hold on for a moment if there are any questions. This probably will
I
be
have
my
a quick,
last.
I have a question, sir.
Sure.
I have a question, sir.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you're talking about the soil salinity and all these things, the
Yes.
properties of soil. Do we have some standards for this, means maintaining the soil quality and soil parameters, so
Yes,
that
there are
one can be
there are
educated on that?
standards. There are standards available for measuring many different components of soil, and one of the most important component is the soil chemistry. There are multiple ingredients in that are measured. There are standards. Soil moisture is one of the most important measurement. When we talk about improving soil quality as well. So yes, there are standards, and there is this measurement done, and this measurement is very important for us to really understand the state of soil in specific place. So as I said, I gave you challenges uh, which may or may not be true universally across every place in the world, but by and large this tells you about the trends in terms of what is happening.
Is there any government program for this, means to maintaining this?
So government program, they are now, for example, they're talking about soil health cards, and that
Ah,
program they want to really promote. It is very recent, and they want to promote that program as much as possible because it gives an indication to farmers as to what really is happening to their soil.
thank you, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So let me go further.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Sujata Tirak. So I have one question and one observation. So first
Sure.
of all, you covered a really, really good overview of, all aspects of sustainability. So thanks for that in a very short time. So you talked about the water scarcity and how alarming it is, and you mentioned that cities like Bangalore are, finished with the groundwater, etc.
Right.
Now, a subject like water, which touches every individual, at individual level or at organization level or at a society level, also there are many things which can be done. And unless those kind of initiatives are started, awareness is built, and people start following them, I think it will not gather momentum and become a people's movement, something like that. So one
Right.
example, if I have to give, usage of plastic water bottles in all our conferences, in marriages, or in any small and big event. Now this is a problematic from two angles. One is the plastic usage, which is again a big threat, we all know. And second is wastage of water because of these bottles, which are used by people half or whatever and then thrown away. So is there any initiative that is taken up by any organization where these things are, because you need to talk to all these hotels which hold the conferences, and also companies and associations which do the conferences. And I always think that this is something which is easily doable, but nobody bothers about it.
Right. So there are actually two parts to your observation, and it's a very, very good observation. So one of the things is, we can take a pledge that we will not drink from a bottled water, right?
Mm,
We will not drink bottled water, even if we are very thirsty. Now that
mm,
makes a push to those who are providing water to make alternative arrangements, and I
mm,
keep doing that all the time. It
yeah,
always helps.
mm,
So second part is, for example, when I was part of the industry in our own organization, we said that we will stop using water bottles altogether, and it
mm,
was not difficult actually. So
yeah,
we just needed something which was refillable for everybody, and of course, sometimes places where drinking water is not available, you can always buy water, but it can be in bulk. You don't need those plastic little bottles, right?
yeah,
So that was easily implementable, and we did implement that. Similarly, I think these inputs we should try and give every time. Let's say we go to a marriage hall, right, and we see that they are, just putting out these small little 200 ml bottles everywhere.
mm,
I think you should go and talk to these people. This is not done, and these are an issue. These are significant issues. I think unless people like us who talk about these aspects, passionately, things don't change. And that's why I keep saying that it's not just a responsibility of the government; it's also responsibility of all of us, right? Because at the end of
yeah,
the day, we consume, right? And
yeah,
one
yeah,
thing you missed out is the amount of energy and water that is required to make that plastic bottle is far,
yeah,
far more than the water itself that is, stored in that. So,
yeah, yeah,
so we have to, be cognizant of some of these aspects to
yeah,
ensure that we start this movement, even at a slightly bigger level. Now we are talking about this whole riverfront development, and people like to
mm,
see great images and so on and so forth. But what is it really doing to our groundwater? Nobody is,
yeah,
really cognizant. So this whole business is going to have a huge issue with it is causing issues with our aquifers, because
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
interface between the river and groundwater is kind of getting blocked. And now,
yeah,
if you do that, you have a further problem with groundwater. So I think these
yeah.
are issues which, of course, all of us need to keep talking and go around. This is a subject in itself.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that riverfront development, that project itself is so flawed on so many fronts. But
Exactly.
that's a different topic altogether.
Right.
But I appeal to everybody who is on this call, like what Ajay just said, let us follow. I myself, our whole of our family, we follow that. Don't use bottled water. Even in the functions that we do, don't serve bottles. And as ISA Pune section, we do some conferences, events every year. So let us pledge that in our conferences, we will insist that the hotel provides the water from glass containers or whatever, reusable, no use of plastic bottles. So I suggest that as ISA Pune, let's do our small bit towards this big problem that we have at hand. And everywhere I go, I make it a point to go and talk to the hotel management. But they are like, if people demand us, we have to give, otherwise we'll lose business. So it is, both ways. So I don't know.
Right.
It is much more difficult to handle at a mass scale than individuals can start, but at some mass scale, something needs to happen. And another example of this similar thing is usage of ACs, HVACs. Every conference you go, you are freezing inside the hall. And every time I go and tell them that please increase the temperature, it's so cold here. So they are, making people uncomfortable and spending so much energy on the doing something which is not needed anyways. So that's another
Indeed.
day-to-day occurrence which house can be stopped if everybody becomes aware and starts demanding.
True. True. Thanks for
Yeah.
your
Anyway,
observation, Sujata.
yeah. Thanks, Ajay.
Yeah, thank you. So let's move further. I know it's already, we are at the end of the hour, but maybe we'll use another 10 minutes or so to wrap this up. Uh, so let's look at what are the actions that we can take, what businesses can do, what governments can do, what individuals and communities can do. We already started this discussion a little bit with Sujata's observation. So let's look at few of these. So what can businesses do? We talked about air conditioners, right? And one of the key things that we have lost track of is, we keep feeling that, we have to build physical products, right? And we have to sell more and more physical products. But end of the day, these products actually give you only a particular service. So these couple of examples will help you, and all of you being part of automation industry will pick this up very, very quickly. So air conditioners was an example cited by Sujata. So for us, we don't really care about air conditioners. What we really care about is, are we comfortable, sitting in that space? And many times this comfort can come through the right kind of architecture level interventions, whereby we will not need an air conditioner at all. Or if we need an air conditioner, we use it in a prudent way. For that matter, the air conditioning company should become an air conditioning company and not an air conditioner company, which essentially means that they should say that I will provide you this service for a fee, month after month after month. It's good for the business and good for people, right? Because they would want to reduce the energy use to the minimum, considering they're charging and getting paid month on month. They would want to make sure that their products last for a long period of time. They don't want to invest more, and they will get a revenue stream. So, all things said, that all things are good for the industry and the company as well who are supplying this service. Similarly, for cars, I mean, we are excessively dependent on, or rather, mentally dependent, I would say, on cars. We don't have to care about, cars per se. What we really care about is mobility. And when you talk about mobility, cars is just one vehicle, and which is probably one of the bad vehicles in the city like Pune. For example, I've been using bicycle all my life, and I have not had any problem using a bicycle until to date. So the point I'm making is, look at mobility. And now, if you look at mobility as a business, I can say, as a business, it will own a vehicle, but it will make sure that, people go from one place to another in a vehicle. The vehicle is utilized maximum amount of time, giving a mechanism whereby I can reduce what I call a apportioning of embodied energy. Those who do not know embodied energy, we can take a different session on that. But the idea is that, you reduce the footprint caused by cars or any such vehicles, and focus on mobility and provide service instead of a product. I think automation and technology have a big role to play if we really want to make this shift possible. Now, there are ideas which have been tried, but to make this shift possible, comfortable, sustainable, I think there is a lot of role that, automation and technology professionals can play. Other opportunities for businesses. Today, businesses do not think about products as to what will happen end of the life. End of the life, the product goes to landfill, and that's probably not what we really want. So you need cradle to cradle thinking. You need to design a product in such a way that end of the life, the product can be reincarnated. You have to start looking and thinking about design for environment. You have to start looking at closed loop industrial system. So maybe there are a bunch of industries working together where, one industry's out waste is some other industry's input. So my waste is your food, is what I call. Then industries must start looking at extended producer responsibility. I will take back my product, right, at the end of life, and find out. Now, if I have this responsibility, I will design the product in a much better way in the first place. The fifth point is not much talked about, but it's very critical, is because 25% of carbon emissions come from the industrial sector. Many of us actually supply into that industrial sector or belong to that sector, which we call hard to abate sector. This sector includes steel, it includes cement, it includes petrochemicals, oil and gas. These 4, 5 sectors, verticals, cause as much as quarter of emissions worldwide. And therefore, this aspect of ability to capture what I call as dense stream CO2. So CO2, as it is emitted in these flue gases, it is between typically 20% to 70%. So capture of that is much easier than when we want to capture, carbon dioxide from air. So direct air capture, as it is called about. So this is one very important lever that we can work on, because we know that for countries like India, We will continue to increase our energy use, and then if we want to stabilize our CO2 emissions, we'll have to do something else with CO2. Then of course corporate responsibility is going to be very important. So sustainability cannot be a patch, on our business. It cannot say that I have my CSR and that 2% takes care of my sustainability responsibility. That's not what it is. Sustainability as a concept has to be built into the design of your business, and how you sell, right from the point as to how you position, how you sell, and of course how you operate. A lot has been said about operational efficiency, but much less is about said about businesses, the how businesses can do things differently, how they can position differently, how they can sell differently, how they can make sure that people get what they want. At the same time, they can reduce the dependence on resources substantially. So what are the imperatives therefore? So we are essentially saying that, industries, individuals, if they don't pay for pollution today, they are going to pay for pollution tomorrow. So, it's important to pay for pollution. It's very critical. We need to internalize these costs. So when we emit some polluting gases, or we release some, liquid effluents to our rivers, we will have to internalize the cost of what we are really doing, right? Which essentially means that we will probably have to ensure that all this is treated very well before it goes into the surroundings, into the environment. And both ecological and social costs have to be considered. We will of course need to think about extreme resource efficiency. And why am I saying extreme? Because I'll give you one example. Now, of late, in India and worldwide, the sale of SUVs has increased, as you keep reading in newspapers. Now, SUVs, as you know, are heavier vehicles than our normal cars. For that matter, even with our normal cars, if they are fairly heavy, they probably use only between 2 to 3% of the energy to move the person. Rest of the energy is used to move the car, which is completely useless. And then we are actually adding to the weight, and then we are saying that we will make that fuel efficient. Now that fuel efficiency just doesn't make any sense, right? We are hardly moving the needle. So what we need to look at is think about extreme resource efficiency. So in this case, the extreme resource efficiency would mean that if at all you need to use a car, you will want the car to be as light as possible. So actually I'm wasting around 50 times the energy of the real purpose of why I use a car, right? 50 times. I'm not talking about 50%. Just look at the numbers, right? And then this resource efficiency, unless we start thinking about it in these forms and these numbers, we don't really understand, what are we talking about when we talk about efficiency. Exploitation, rational exploitation, we have already talked about. We can consider moving to bioeconomy wherever it is possible. So use the resources which come from the biotic space, because they are easily digested by nature again. And if it is not possible, then you try to keep the other resources in the closed loop so that you keep using them again and again. What can we do as individuals? As I said, one of the things that we could do is, we focus on services, even like businesses do. Even we focus on services. Don't bring in assets when they are not required. Focus on services, keep getting those services. We focus on our well-being, so we don't have to focus on amount of money we earn every month, but how well we are at the end of the month as individuals. We can rethink every time when we decide to consume something. We have to rethink and refuse, as I call, if that particular consumption is not really a necessity. Uh, we of course know that we remember that every act of consumption leads to depletion of resources, and that's what we do not want. We can seek experiences rather than stuff, right? We don't have to stuff our rooms with products. We can find out, if we can seek a nice experience, which is actually the end goal of a product, or expected end goal of a product anyway. And think zero waste. And if we think zero waste, we will design our own, or we will ensure that our habits start aligning with this whole idea, and then we will at the least minimize waste. Last point is what governments can do. So governments can do many things, and good part is at least some initiatives have been taken by the government, and some initiatives have been quite terrible as well. It's a weird mix of policies that the government has. But then orient policies towards reducing use of fossil energy as much as possible. Uh, because not just because that's good for the planet, so to say, but it is also good for us from an energy security perspective, right? We import most of, if you look at India, we import most of the fossil fuels except coal. Rationalize pricing of natural resources, so which essentially means that the resources which are really scarce, you don't give subsidies to those resources. You will have to make sure that the pricing also does its bit in terms of reducing consumption. And then promote use of end use services rather than products. Encourage distributed development, smaller businesses. All these make a lot of social sense as well, apart from environmental sense. And there has to be some encouragement for that, rather than saying that cities are going to grow and we'll have to figure out how we manage. So distributed development, I think, is going to be a critical part. Hopefully that will happen over a period of time, and governments must encourage some of these aspects. Closed loop industrial ecosystems. Now Netherlands has done some good job in terms of this. Whole subject is called industrial ecology, and whereby you're talking about keeping your abiotic resources or mineral resources, things like iron and steel and plastics and so on and so forth, in closed loop, so they don't go to landfills, but they again become inputs to an industry. Then we talk about some of the public policies. One of the issues also which we must realize is that resource use is very inequitable. Rich people use far more resources and the poor people do not have anything to use, right? So that becomes an issue. So policies should look at, especially when we talk about building public infrastructure and services, they should be tailored towards masses. A good example of how that doesn't happen is we keep building flyovers which are primarily for car owners. Car owners are only 4%, 5%, 10%, depending upon which city you're talking about, and rest of the society, the whole of that expenditure is useless for rest of the people. So investing in services and infrastructure which can be used by every member of the society is something which has to be the center of policy. Promote commons and help manage commons better. So commons essentially means that it is everybody's thing, and many times when it is everybody's, it's nobody's. So that shouldn't happen. So management of commons is an important aspect. Invest in restoring nature. Wherever we have actually made bad decisions on land use changes, we can go back. We can restore nature in those places. Today, we have as much as 28% of barren land. So the land which can be restored potentially, and we can restore that to hopefully climatic conditions like forests or grasslands or savannas, whatever they were, in those areas and geographic regions. And very important, therefore, is head towards decreasing aggregate energy consumption over a period of time. For India, it's going to be difficult. Maybe for some more years, we will continue to increase that till the time 60% have better energy access. But if we use everything prudently, including the rich managing their energy better and making that same energy kind of available to the other sectors of the society, I think we should have policies around how this can be managed better. So in summary, climate change is tip of the iceberg. We have to look at the whole sustainability landscape. Uh, and this is actually just a visible impact of a much larger challenge that we have. There is a very strong need, a fundamental shift in how we tackle the larger challenges of resource depletion, and not just CO2 emissions, which are being talked about in planetary boundaries. Uh, I think aggregate energy use is a very important aspect that we have to keep tracking. Many times I keep talking about a very interesting paradox which is called Jevons paradox. And Jevon was an economist, and what he observed was, when we are talking about, let's say, he gave an example of a transistor, that is your triode. One of the few, the first was born sometimes in 1950, and it was based on the CRT principle, the cathode ray tube principle, and it used to consume a whole lot of energy, right? And we said, oh, we will make this particular little device energy efficient. And now we have made this uh, transistor energy efficient to probably, it consumes 1 millionth of, or 1 billionth of energy that was consumed by the CRT transistor. But if you look at the aggregate energy used by all the transistors today, it is, exponentially more than what was probably used in 50s and 60s. So this is called a paradox, where as we reduce the, or make the widget more efficient, you'll end up using more products and more widgets, and end of the day start using far more energy than what you would otherwise use. And it's a very interesting observation, and we will have to, deal with this. We have to be aware of something of this kind which happens, and that is because of the economic compulsions of perpetual compounded growth that we talk about. I think for India, we must recognize that population is a huge multiplier, and on one side, it might be a blessing that we have good demographics for having more people who can work, but it is also a curse that will therefore land up consuming much more than countries which have less population otherwise. Well-being and equity needs to be the center stage of development thinking. I think that is the key message, where we move away from pure play GDP. GDP is, or has been, an indication of how our economies grow, and while it has served the purpose, I think we'll have to start really speaking, looking at well-being, how, whether well-being has grown, how much has it grown compared to the growth of GDP, and so on and so forth. How can we make sure that the equity and equitability, distribution of resources, access to resources, becomes the center stage of policy? So I think with this, I will stop. If there are a couple of questions, I'll be happy to take.